right there.
All right, what's up, guys? Welcome back to Tactical Rifleman. This week, I'm gonna do something a little bit different. You guys know that I don't really like to self-promote and all that, but I'm gonna do a little bit of that this week because what I'm gonna show you is actually a new knife design that I have made in collaboration with Tim Kell of TKell Knives, the new Sapper knife. So I've made this in collaboration with my good friend Tim Kell. He's the owner of TKell Knives, right? Crazy word association there. So this is a knife that originally I came up with years ago when I had a business as a custom knife maker. I was making knives by hand, and I've kind of revived this design. This was originally requested of me by some guys in my old unit in the military, and we deal with a lot of demolition and stuff like that. So I'm going to discuss kind of some of the knife features and why it looks like this. I think it ended up looking pretty just kind of by accident, but the whole thing here is about what it does. I didn't really design this based on looks. 100% of this is for function. So let's get going. Originally, I was hand making these out of D2 steel, which is one of my favorite steels to make knives out of. But we needed something a little more stainless, and you guys know that I'm big on the material of the blade. That's the foundation of the house, right? That we build everything on top of, and that's the steel. I wanted something that's a little more corrosion resistant, and of course, Tim is a lot more up to date with all the new steels and all the cool new number and letter combinations that they have for all the steels. So we went with AEBL, which is a wonderful stainless steel, holds an edge great, takes a lot of abuse, and good corrosion resistance. Originally, I'd requested D2, and we were talking about maybe doing 1095 because Tim really likes 1095 steels, and I said, no. Any blade that we're making that is supposed to go to soldiers or soldier types or people that behave in the same way that we do, it can't be a 1095. It cannot be a high carbon steel that you have to keep sharpening and that you have to keep oiling. That just doesn't really work, right? Because those of us in the field, really how often do the majority of soldiers, regardless of how much they love their knives, you can't really maintain your knife that well all the time. So that's why we went with AEBL. So far, it's been working out as a tremendous steel. Love it. That's that. Let's talk about some of the design features. What you guys will probably notice is I left plenty of room here in the handle, right? There's this nice recurve that we'll discuss here in a bit. Those kinds of features, and a lot of people see this bird's beak as a good piece of the knife in terms of hacking, right? So those of you guys who want a good survival woodsman type of knife, this will answer the majority of your needs for being in the woods, whether it's cutting wood, creating a shelter, whittling, right? We'll get into that in just a second. But where I started is I've left a lot of room, as you can see, and I have reasonably large hands, and my fingers may be a little on the short side, but the palms are really big, and I still left quite a bit of room here, right? So there's a couple of reasons for that. In terms of your normal use, if you're talking fighting, what I will do is I will choke up on the blade a little bit on the handle, and that gives me room to rest my thumb comfortably on the spine. The newer model, of course, will have jimping all down the spine. The reason this does not have jimping is actually because I took a few of these and I did hand file work on them as kind of a special edition. But from here on in, they're all gonna be jimped on the back. So when you move your hand forward on a blade like this, right, and you see how my trigger finger here is kind of touching or pushed up against the guard, which is a little bit oversized for obvious reasons, right? Last thing I need is my hand running up onto the cutting edge, which is actually surprisingly sharper than how I even designed it. So for fighting, this gives you a little more, the knife moves a little bit better in your hand, right? But when you want to chop stuff, right, if you're in that survival situation or you're out camping in the woods or whatever, and you want to hack at stuff, I just let my pinky go back and sit against this bird's beak here, or puño as some people would call it. And that's giving you a little more front weight to the blade. And so it actually makes it easier to chop. Everything here is contoured well so that you're not going to get any kind of hot spots or any weird friction points between the handle and your hand. Of course, the handle here, the scales are a beautifully machined G10 with kind of the signature TKell scalloping on there. You'll notice this little tether here. I always tether everything in a tactical sense. I will tether this to my gear, my LBE, my if you're old like me, LBE or your plate carrier or whatever it is. Tim actually came up with this, and I'm doing this kind of in reverse order, but I want to point this out because it's a really cool feature, right? It's just a piece of 550 cord, but here's the cool thing, and you can kind of size this to your own hand, but what I'll do is I'll flip it over the top and kind of make a loop down here at the bottom with both sides of that cord. I will push my 3 bottom fingers without my trigger finger. I'll put those through the loops. And one of the cool things about these scallops is as I, depending on my hand size or whatever, or what I'm doing, I can kind of move that between the scallops to get the tension that I require on this tether. And so what that does is if I am doing hacking with this knife, chopping, whatever it is, if I am splitting wood, this knife is kind of glued to my hand, right? And that's a really cool feature because what it does is it makes your hand less tired when you're doing that for a long time. We'll keep talking about some more features, but first I gotta let YouTube hit you in the face with a commercial. We'll be right back. All right, so I've shown you a couple of the grips, the ways you can grip this knife. Let's talk about the blade a second. What are some cool things about this? You'll notice this gentle recurve in the blade. That does a couple things for you, other than obviously it's very visually stimulating, right? It's kind of a nice, appeasing arc to it, but really it's got a use. It's also got a downside that I'll discuss here in just a second, but the use for it is if I'm doing outside stuff and I'm trying to whittle something, let's see, let me find something to whittle on. Let's pretend I'm whittling on this used 9-banger, right? You're gonna wanna choke up and put your trigger finger in this finger choil, okay? And that's what that's for, is gentle work. You're not gonna wanna be hacking and stuff with your finger inside of this finger choil, okay? That's for doing kind of more surgical work, if you will, all right? What this recurve allows me to do is actually it kind of curves around your piece of wood or whatever it is that you're whittling, and it gives you kind of better control and better cutting. Also, that recurve will help you kind of use this as a draw knife if you have to. Not something I've done a lot with knives, but I've had a lot of requests for knives to be able to do that. The spine here should be nice and comfy for that kind of use as well. The thickness of the blade, which I've not mentioned, these right now are 3/16. Tim Kell walked me off that tree that I was on. I wanted to make it a 1/4 inch. He decided, and rightfully so, that it should be 3/16 cross section, which actually makes this knife a lot sharper than my original design was based on the bevel height, right? The grind here. So anyway, that's a word about the recurve. The one drawback I said I was gonna mention about the recurve is the fact that it is a little bit trickier to sharpen. So a recurve like this, if you wanna sharpen in the field, a lot of your sharpening stones will be flat on one side and kind of have a gentle slope on the other side. So on a knife that's got a recurve like this, you're gonna wanna consider having you know, something like that, or maybe a rod that you use to sharpen with, and that kind of deal. Totally doable in the field, it just takes a little more getting used to. All right, moving forward. This big fat belly here in the front, some people have made the comment that it's almost reminiscent of a kukri. Yep, that's the idea, right? So for chopping and hacking, that belly is actually gonna help you get a bit of a better hit, right? A little better strike with that. It's giving it a little more weight in the front, and that's kind of one of the big points of this knife, pun intended. All right, moving forward. Let's talk about tip design. A lot of people don't really get into tip design. They just know things about, the differences, for example, between a Tonto and a Wharncliffe that have similar shapes, except the cutting edge and the tip are on a different side of the knife, right? On a Wharncliffe, your tip is going to be on the bottom in line with your cutting edge. And on a Tonto, your tip's going to be at the top, which is where that steel is strongest. Strongest naturally because it's thickest up top, right? Here what you have is, I wanted to make sure that that tip is in a straight line with this point just behind the screws here. And I'm gonna get into that in a minute because I'm covering all the normal stuff about the knife first. I'm gonna get into the actual intended purpose in just a second. So the tip, I really needed this tip to be as strong as possible. And what you'll notice is that, yes, there's a bit of a false edge here. It's not even a false edge because these two grinds right here, they do not meet, right? So there is a flat area up top. And so that's, and it's kind of more for the visual effect than anything, right? So it's not just big, bulky, and ugly up top. But what you'll notice is that these flat grinds right up here, they actually end about a 1/4 inch before the tip. And what that does is it makes that tip as thick and as resilient as it can be based on the steel, based on the hardness, and based on the grind geometry. All right, let's get into exactly why it's so important for this knife to have such a strong tip and why I called it the Sapper to begin with, right? There's a reason. We weren't just trying to be gimmicky here. There's an actual purpose that, that connects to it. So here's the crux of the whole issue, guys. Why do we call it the Sapper? Well, the original design that I made this for was actually for probing for landmines. That's one of the biggest uses. In my military service, I have done a lot of probing for mines. It's not something you want to do. It's not fun. It's dangerous and it's crappy work, but in the event that you have to find your way out of a minefield, or if you're in the military sense, there's a bunch of other reasons you may have to do it, you want an appropriate tool. And so there are many other tools. A lot of people ask me, why would you design a knife specifically for probing for landmines when you have a metal detector or a probing rod or various other things? Well, not every situation allows you to use these other tools. Not every mine actually has steel in it. Sometimes you have to be in a lower dimension. And if you buy this knife, for example, as a non-sapper, then it's probably all you got, right? You don't carry around fancy gear with you. I'm gonna keep telling you about probing for mines here in just a second, but I gotta let YouTube give you another commercial. All right, so we're talking about probing for mines. Why would you do it? And how would you do it, right? We have a whole nother video for you showing exactly how we do it, okay? But I'm gonna give you the basic idea of why this knife was designed for it. So, the biggest design feature, in my opinion, of this knife is actually kind of the puño end here, or the pommel end as people call it sometimes, right? And you'll see this nice curve. And I've actually had people ask, oh, well, I want a skull crusher on there or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, you clearly don't understand the purpose of this tool. It's a tool that has a very specific purpose in mind. The grip that I use for probing is this, right? I know a lot of people think this is very unusual. It is unusual, right? But what happens here is if I'm probing, and I suppose I should tell you guys what probing is for those of you guys who don't know what it is. Sometimes if you got to find a mine underground, a landmine, sometimes you may have to use a knife. And what happens is you can literally probe the ground for these mines. There's a whole technique to it, like I said before. Some of your blade might be underground, right? It will be underground as you're probing. The conversation between the ground and my brain is actually happening right here where the knife interfaces with my hand, right? That spot right there. And you see how well that fits in the palm of my hand. This bird beak here, its real intended purpose is this grip, right? So with one of these two fingers, or however you might find it more comfortable, I just wrap them around. It doesn't have to be a strong grip. On the contrary, it's got to be a pretty loose grip, and so you have to have something at least securing the knife to your hand. And when the knife hits something underground, that point right there connecting to your hand is actually going to be able to tell you what type of material it is, right? I'm not going to be able to tell you, oh, that's stainless versus steel or iron or whatever, but you can feel the difference once you get really good at this between, for example, a metal and a rock, okay, or a piece of plastic. Once you get really good, you can actually tell. In order to do that, you have to have a really comfortable connection point here to your hand. So that's kind of that idea. We'll get into that more, or you can check it out more when you see our Probing for Landmines video. Moving forward, you'll notice that straight line down these screws, which by the way they're hollow and removable, so you can switch grips or whatever you need, but they're actually hollow, and what that does is enables me to actually tie this onto a stick if I need to, in a survival situation, create like a spear or something of that nature. All right, so this line right here, you'll see it ends at the tip, right? So when this knife has, or when the tip of the knife is underground, or maybe there's a little bit of bush or grass or whatever, as I get a glint of this line, right, it's giving my brain a good indication of exactly where that tip is, because I don't have visual contact with that tip when it's underground, right? So that's the idea with this. The next generation is actually going to have hash marks. It'll be metric on one side, empirical on the other side, so it can help you gauge depth or measure things out like, oh, I don't know, det cord and that kind of thing, or time fuse, right? So this all connects to sapping. Guys, those are the basic elements of and design features of this knife. There's one other thing I want to show you though. Here's the one other thing. Kydex sheath, right? Everybody's like, oh, okay, yeah, Kydex sheath. There's nothing to explain about it. Oh, but there is. This is the brilliance of Tim Kell. So this is a true collaboration, right? None of this, I'm not the type of person either to be like, this is my knife, I did it all, and you know, Tim, you just make it like I say it. No, the beauty is we're working together and we can both combine our experiences to create a better product. So I told Tim, I was like, hey, listen, man, I want this to be really secure. If I want it to not come out of the sheath, for example, you guys know I do stupid things. I jump out of airplanes with all kinds of silly things. And I specifically told him, hey, I intend to skydive with this knife. I want to know beyond any doubt that when I'm jumping out of an airplane and this thing gets hit by 170-mile-an-hour wind, that it's not coming unsheathed, right? And so what he did is he put in his ingenious locking mechanism, right? So we all know, if we know anything about Kydex, that the lips of the sheath here, you see that? You see how they kind of open to let that knife out right here, right? That is the point where retention is released from the holster, from the sheath, I'm sorry. And so what he did is he added this little piece right here of Kydex, and there's a screw in there with a rubber grommet. And what happens is I can, or a rubber washer, I'm sorry. And so I will unlock that a little bit, move the screw to the upwards position, and I will tighten it back down. And what that does, you don't have to crank on it too much. You saw I gave it between a quarter and a half turn, and that really gives you a lot of retention. Now, if you really, really, really want this knife right now, you can make it come out. But really, it's very strong retention. If I want the retention to go back to normal, I move that down, lock it in, and now I have very positive but silky smooth retention. So that's pretty much the idea, guys. These knives are available to purchase on TKellKnives.com. Go ahead and get yours now. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Keep loving knives, and we'll see you next week.
If you like this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter so you don't miss out on anything.